but I like almost immediately teared up seeing it because maybe being a photographer and doing video stuff, I just never seen light in that kind of dimension.
When I was younger, I had this image in my head that my life was going to be big. And slowly, as my life unfolded, I realized
I'd be so pissed if I got to the end of my life and I felt like I hadn't done something. This is the Lifted Spirits podcast, where we raise a glass, share encouraging thoughts and stories, and discuss how we find meaning through family, friendship, art, business, and everything in between. Today, I did an interview with Angela Sammer, who is an artist in residence at an Anglican church, and she recently put together an exhibit from multiple artists, painters, sculptors, musicians, and I was just really impressed by it. So I thought she'd be a great person to interview, but before we hop into that, I just wanted to say a quick little something. Hey, Andrew here, and I wanted to say that of all the people who watch the podcast on YouTube, only 15% of those people are subscribed to the channel, and I never wanted to be one of those people who was like and subscribe, y'all, but yet here I am. If you would subscribe, it would help the channel immensely, because over time, the dream, my promise to you if you subscribe, is to make the channel better, and not just make the channel better, but the dream is to have more in-person events one day where you're connecting with people who are also looking for meaning and have similar mindsets, and would like to do one as early as this year if possible. But please hit that subscribe button. Oh gosh, I'm a YouTuber now. Anyway, thanks. We're here with Angela. Why don't you just introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah. My name is Angela Sammer. I live here in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And I am the mother of 2 boys, and I'm a printmaking artist and really heavily involved with our church here called Christ the King Anglican Church.
Yeah, and before, I like people ask things like, what do you do? What do you like? I like the question, what are you like? So if you had to describe yourself, how would you describe yourself?
Oh, how would I describe myself? I think that I'm pretty chill, and I get really excited about people who are into creating things. Like if you have something that you like to create, I get really curious about that. I want to know how you do it, why you do it, who also gets interested in it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can totally relate. We had a 3-hour drive, well, more than 3 hours for the Eclipse yesterday.
Yeah.
Round trip. And so I had a lot of time to talk about this with some friends, and we're talking about that very thing, just like getting excited about the creative process and people who are just into their thing.
Yeah.
Whatever it may be. Did you have any Eclipse plans?
I did. My boys and I drove down to Little Rock. My parents live there, so we got to see that with them. I had seen the one in 2017, also with my mom, but this was my first time to see it with my dad. And it was so much fun because my dad had never seen it, and I think he didn't really know what to expect. So just to see someone who's in their 70s, has arguably seen a lot of life, but to still just like be in awe and experience wonder. And, when we were in the path of totality. And so when the eclipse like fully happened, like you could just hear all over the neighborhood, everyone was just like, so excited. And how often does that happen? Not that often. So it was pretty amazing to be a part of.
Yeah, same. We went to this lookout point near the same general area, Hot Springs, and there were all sorts of people with their cameras and whatnot set up, and just met people from Canada, from France, from I think there were some South American people there too, and everyone had just come and ended up at this one place. And I'd never seen a total solar eclipse, but it was really, I was surprised by how, I knew it was going to be cool, but I almost immediately teared up seeing it, because maybe being a photographer and doing video stuff, I just never seen light in that kind of dimension.
Yeah.
And it was just mind blowing.
Yeah.
And so it was really cool.
Yeah, it was, my boys couldn't get over it. Holy moly, this is the coolest experience. It was fun.
Yeah, I bet. And then what would you say is just the best thing that's happened to you in the past month?
Well, we just talked about it, the eclipse, like doing that with my family.
We already hit that. You
Okay.
pick something else.
Another one. Coolest thing that happened in the last month. Honestly, so our church just recently did a Stations of the Cross exhibition, it's a very, very old service. It's 14 different moments from the life of Christ. It's typically arranged around the perimeter of a sanctuary. And so, we had 14 different artists from our church community. So this is visual artists, poets, musicians, and everybody, each artist was assigned a station, and they were able to represent that moment in whatever their medium was. And that was installed in our sanctuary. And to watch people come through and to be able to experience that, people who have maybe had difficult experiences in churches or not really seen pain and suffering represented in those ways. I think it was really impactful for a lot of people. And so that was just a really cool thing to be a part of.
Yeah, it was really impressive. I had just been to an art museum in California the week before, and it was a bit underwhelming. And I knew going to this exhibit was very overwhelming. And I really don't think it's because I knew several of the people who created the pieces, but it really just was good art that was well curated and put together. And just the first one, there was this crazy painting of Coral, who I also interviewed before. I'll have to plug her painting that she did, because it blew my mind. Like, I wish I could paint like that. Like, how does someone just think of that and put it on a canvas? That's not one of my skill sets, unfortunately. As bad as I've wanted it to be over time, I'm just not really a painter. But it was, we'll have to stitch in the video some of the pieces that people put in.
Yeah, sure.
They were really complex, like hanging from the ceiling kind of things. And it was something.
Yeah, the artists really threw themselves into it, which was just beautiful. And, as an artist who is a part of it, it's fun to be able to walk through and not just see individual works of art from individual artists, but, all of us artists have been working on these things together, sharing ideas, and this is how it's coming along. And so not only do you see these individual works, but you also see the conversations that happen, like, oh, I remember when this person said that to that person, and there it is in their artwork.
Yeah.
And so we get the privileged view of seeing it also as a community.
And your particular piece in that, like, what did that look like, and what was the inspiration?
Yeah, so my station was Jesus is Helped by Simon of Cyrene. So if you're unfamiliar with the story, there's a moment when Jesus is carrying his crossbeam up to the cross before the crucifixion, and he's been tortured, and so his body is weak, and so he can't carry it. And so the Roman soldiers ask a man who's just up in Jerusalem for the festival to help him carry the cross. And so as I was thinking through, like, what was that like? We don't know a lot about Simon of Cyrene. We don't know if he knew who Jesus was. We don't know if he loved him, if he hated him. So I was it's hard to get inside that person when you don't really know. And so I really just took, like, what is his body experiencing? So visually, like, literally, what is he seeing? And I imagined him kind of bowed over with the weight of this wood, and what he would have seen, which would have, been the ground. And so he would have seen the shadows of all the people around him, his own shadow carrying the wood, and then Jesus's feet directly in front of him, because he's following Jesus. And so regardless of what he felt about Jesus, he was commanded to follow, and so he did.
Yeah, that was a really powerful piece. And what was your experience like, sort of being the curator of sorts of this whole art gallery?
Yeah, it is. Honestly, it's incredible to see people. It's to see people bring their creativity, that people, bring these ideas, and you're just like, where has that been hiding? I've known you for a long time. I had no idea that was in there. And so for me, it's just really exciting for people to have an opportunity to create, to have an opportunity to share a part of themselves, and to be in a position to give them fertile ground to plant something and watch it grow, and then watch other people interact with it. It's just, I feel very privileged to be able to, I don't know, till that ground, I guess.
Yeah, if that could be like a full-time job. That might be my dream job. It's like helping, creating things myself, but then helping other people with their creating their things and pulling it together. And so it sounded, I'm sure it was plenty of work, but
so those things are.
Exactly. And then just in general, art, is like reaching out for something beyond us and trying to touch meaning. And so what would you say, whether in your art or just your day-to-day life, that currently is giving you the most drive? Like when you get out of bed, what are you excited about? What's pushing you to just like live fully?
Yeah. So it's a big question. So I'm gonna bring it down to just like one kind of small thing that it's a change that I have made recently, which is that I have started sketching in ink. So my whole life, whenever I've drawn or sketched or worked out ideas, I've always done it in pencil so that, if a line doesn't come out just right, I can erase it and then I can correct it. And then if it doesn't come out all right again, I'll erase it and correct it. And so there's this just back and forth until I get things just exactly. And so there's a lot of control, too much control that I put into my work. And so I forget now what even made me decide to do it. I was like, I'm going to just see maybe it was part of a Lenten discipline that I was like, I'm going to see what happens when I sketch in pen. Like, and I can't erase. And so I'm going to make mistakes. Those are inevitable. Like no one's going to draw the perfect drawing ever. And so when you sketch in ink, those mistakes, they lose their power a little bit because they're there and you just have to accept that they're there. And you can either make your peace with them or sometimes you can befriend them and maybe sit with them for a second and see what they're saying and see if you can incorporate that into your work. And so I have found that even my sketch practice has gotten a lot more exciting. My work has become more interesting because the drawing has a little bit more of a mind of its own. It's less about me like having such rigid control. And in the way of all things, usually I feel like as I have leaned into this practice, I feel like that has also kind of worked its way into the rest of my life as well. When I make mistakes, be okay with that and maybe listen to them and see what that mistake is trying to tell me and inform me about my situation. So,
yeah, and I think not everybody someone who might say I'm not that into art. That's not necessarily something that has to be fixed, but what might you say to someone who just says, "Oh, I'm not really into that."
Not really into art?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Well,
like how do you sell them on the value of the pieces you create, the pieces others create?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I was talking with a group that I meet with regularly to discuss art, and the other day we were talking about art and hospitality, and what does art and hospitality, what do those things have to do with one another? And I came to realize as I was thinking through all these things that even if you would say art is not your thing, and it's not everybody's thing, and there's nothing wrong with you if art is not your thing, sometimes it's just not. But if you take up the practice of experiencing art, again, whether that's visual art, poetry, music, whatever, it can become a spiritual discipline for hospitality, because you are opening yourself up to this other thing, this thing that maybe you don't understand, comes from a different place. You don't really know what it's trying to say to you. It's an other. And when you open yourself up to that, to sit there with it, knowing that you can't change it because it is what it is, you are teaching yourself how to interact with others, like others. So how do I open myself up to conversation with someone who is different from me, who is saying something I don't understand or I don't expect? So I would say that artwork has a way to expand our sense of hospitality, our sense of welcome and generosity towards people who are different from us.
And do you remember a time that you saw a piece, or heard a piece, or just saw some kind of art, and it really had that effect on you, where you just had to stop and reconsider?
I grew up as a child not really in an artistic household. Visual art, I should say. Grew up in a very evangelical Christian household, which is wonderful, but there's just not much of an emphasis on visual art. There is on music. And so I grew up very musical. I started playing piano when I was very young and then started playing the violin. So I would go to the Little Rock Orchestra all the time. This was the first time that I had ever experienced art that like truly moved me. There was a Sibelius concerto, and now I'm going to forget the name of it, but it's a violin concerto, maybe in like D minor or something.
Yeah,
and
you can send it to me.
Yeah.
It's probably old enough that it's royalty free.
Oh, for sure. Yes. Yes. So I was sitting there with these friends, and it's the first time that I was not a very emotional child. I'm still not super I don't cry very easily. But I was moved to tears just by the beauty of this violin concerto. And that was the first time that I remember thinking, wow, this is doing something in me that I don't understand. And it's really beautiful. And so I'm going to have to come back and figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I've definitely found myself as I don't know how into art I was growing up. I had similar background of lots of music, not visual or film and things like that. But it seemed like I was very intellectual and trying to figure out the world almost entirely that way. And then you just get to your wit's end and can't piece it all together and feel like the meme guy with all the like things crossed together. And art has definitely helped me explore some of those things that are like that, it's not just wishful thinking, but that you're really getting in touch with something that's like right past your grasp, but you're like, no, it's there. It's like you can feel the heat on it and everything, but you're not quite there. And that's been really valuable for me. And which I still think when people say I'm not into art, I always think, well, really? Like, like you might think that, but everyone listens to music and watches movies and, has big ideas and wants to express them. And so I definitely think art is for everybody to some extent. Even if you're a plumber and you're like having that perspective of like doing something really well, and that's a craft, that's an art. And which I forgot to mention earlier, that I remembered when you talking about writing in ink, you did that one drawing that was like a single line.
Yeah.
Right. What's the story behind that?
Yes, so that was a part of another kind of communal artist installation that our church did during Advent. And so our priest gave us Psalm 130 to think about and meditate through, thinking about Advent, as a time of waiting, which is, the ancient Israelites were waiting for the arrival of the Messiah. We now are awaiting for Christ's return. So what does it mean to wait on the Lord? And so I was thinking about that phrase, waiting on the Lord, but specifically in prayer. And when I think about myself in prayer, you always think about this waiting. Your attention is just unfixed. Like, I'm so good at this. I've got my eyes perfectly trained on him. But what really happens with them? My mind pings over here for a little while and I have to drag it back over here. And then it pings over there for a little while and I have to drag it back over here. And so I can get frustrated with myself at how fickle my mind is and how weak it is to be able to stay trained on this one thing. But then I realized that like with every decision to return, that is, that can be the thing that I do the most, at least, right? It doesn't have to be the thing I'm doing constantly, but it's the thing I do the most. And so I wanted to try to represent that. And it's hard to represent time in a static 2D image. So I wanted to do a continuous line drawing, and that line is my intention. And it was a self-portrait, and it was, I might draw, a little bit of a line of me looking off in one direction, and then I would come back and work on an image of me staring directly at the viewer, and then I would go off to another position and come back. And so in this coming and going, by the end, there are these kind of shadow images of me looking in all different directions, but the very obviously primary posture is me staring straight ahead, which is a way to say, my wanderings are not necessarily failures as long as I commit to return.
Yeah, it was really neat. I'd never seen something quite like that. And I love when there's, a concept that's represented visually that's pretty immediately obvious. And I just really enjoy, some art might look pretty, but for me, for it to really be a banger, like a 10 out of 10, there has to be some like concept attached to it. And so when I saw that, I thought, whoa, that's really neat and very distinct as well. Yeah. We got these Mondays mezcal again.
Yeah.
I really like it. It's a little
Tasty.
spicy.
I like spice.
Yeah, I'm still trying to get that sponsorship Monday. We'll stay connected one day. What would you say, for you? Obviously, we never peak necessarily in life, but what would it look like for you to feel like you've made it in life?
Yeah. I feel like this idea of making it, like you said, we never peak. I feel like this idea of arrival is a little bit futile because we've all either experienced it ourselves or heard about, the person, that's as soon as I get married, like I will have arrived, or as soon as I have kids, or as soon as I get this job. But as soon as you reach that thing, then there's always the next thing.
Yeah.
And so for me, making it is more about less a destination than making it onto the correct path to continue walking. So for me, as a follower of Christ, I'm aware that there is the kingdom of God that's all around me. And so as I am looking in my midst, like understanding where the kingdom of God is at work and where God is calling me to be a participant with him, a co-creator with him, and like this bringing forth the kingdom of God. And so for me, making it is when I am able to discern that path and walk in it. And that, like, sometimes that work doesn't really look like success to everybody else at all. Sometimes it looks like absolute failure. But to understand that when I'm working alongside him, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And then there's contentment with that because he is the primary creator. And so you can kind of, as long as you are with him and doing that work, you can kind of release like what success looks like because it's not really yours to determine anyway. So for me, it's more about finding the right journey.
Yeah, and what would some of those details look like? Like what if you were to this is because every time I try to ask this question to people, I totally get the like, oh yeah, we've never made it, we're trying to arrive on something, but like a life well lived, what are some of the things that you feel like you're really aiming for to, like, when you get to your deathbed one day, you'll think, I don't have any regrets because, like, what are the things that you did with your life or the kind of person you became?
Yeah, I think, and this kind of is maybe a bigger conversation. So when I was younger, when I was, late teens, through college and grad school, early adult, I had this image in my head that my life was going to be big. I came from a smaller town, so I was going to move to a big city, and I was going to have a job at a big university, and I was going to get the big paycheck, and I was going to have influence over lots and lots of people. And slowly, as, my life unfolded, I realized that no, actually, like, smaller is where it's at. And creating moments of beauty that aren't big, that aren't expected. Like, everyone expects all the big stuff. No one expects the small things. There was a moment, I remember this very vividly. It's a key point in my life. We were on a family vacation in Colorado, and we were up in the mountains. We were up above the timberline, so there's no trees. It's just grass, I guess. So when you're just looking, the grass at this time was kind of a yellowish color, but I feel like I dropped something, maybe a glove or one of the boys' cups, who knows. But I bent down to pick it up, and when I got down to the earth, I realized that there were all of these like microscopic wildflowers. And then when you looked way close, it was actually not just one color, but it was all of these colors of these tiny wildflowers. And it was one of those moments where your mind just explodes, and I was like, oh, like that is it. Like the real beauty is when you get down so small and you experience this absolute just gorgeous beauty that doesn't have to be there, but it is, and I got to see it. And I realized that for me was a much more satisfying way to live. Like if I look at my life, it doesn't have to be big. Like what kind of small, ordinary beauty can I create that would, delight the people who I actually like rub elbows with, my family, my friends who come over, the people in my community that I befriend. What can I do to create beauty for them in places that they might not expect?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to get you to elaborate on that some because I need some assistance in this very regard because just on okay, I'm trying to think if I should backtrack to even tell the
Yeah.
story, but because just 2 interviews ago, we talked with my friend's therapist.
Okay.
So that was fun to do sort of like a session all together with my
Wow.
buddy. And one of the things he had said was that his child had said, because they were talking about death at one point. His son's a teenager, and just asked him, what do you think will happen when we die? And his son said, well, I won't know till I get there, and I hope people miss me when I'm gone, or something to that effect. And I thought that was really profound answer. And because I think I am so driven to want to do something, like you said, and I'm really attached to that idea. Like it's very much a part of my being. And I don't know how much I want to separate from it because it's like, well, if you separate too far, will it not happen? And it's really, for me, it's not about, I genuinely don't need fame or money or anything, but you just want to feel like you made a difference and you feel like you have this ability in you to do something that's profound and resonates, and that would show by like the scale maybe of its effect. And yeah, and then being like, well, I'm 31. It's not like sometimes a little over dramatic, like, oh, my life's already over, and, but realizing, that's not the way life might look, and that might be okay. But then I don't know if I can accept that. So why don't you just like elaborate some on how to make peace with just being a person, like not having to be the person who changes everything and revolutionizes like this or that sphere of the world. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think about there's the story in the Bible when Jesus is a great big crowd of people who are listening to him and they need to be fed. And his disciples are like, let's send him away to get a bunch of food. And he's like, no, what do we have? And so there's a little boy who brings just a couple loaves of fish, or a couple loaves of bread and a few fish. And he blesses them and breaks them. And with this one boy's small offering, Jesus is able to feed all of these people. And that has been a story that has always comforted me, because as long as I am offering what I have, what skills do I have in this moment? What gifts do I have for this moment? That's all that's up to me to offer. And Jesus is able to take that and multiply it far greater than I could ever imagine. So for example, a long time ago, 10 years or so ago, we moved here to Northwest Arkansas from a large community. We moved here, we had no community, and we became a part of this, church plant, and we were quite small. And this was many years ago now. This was prior to COVID. We put together a little devotional book, I guess. It had for the O antiphons, which are 7 short prayers that lead up to Christmas Day. And so someone in our community wrote a short devotional, and another artist either wrote a poem or a piece of visual art to go alongside it. And we just printed out a small number of these to be distributed to our congregation. I hadn't thought about this thing in a long time. But I was out having breakfast with a new friend that I have made recently, who has just recently joined our church. And she brought this up to me, this booklet. She was friends with a woman that I knew who was getting them printed. And so she just happened to get a copy of it. And so this relatively small thing that we worked on years and years ago is still having a difference in someone's life right now. And she talked to me about how impactful that was for her. And so that's just one example for me, that I'm just not in control. I'm not in control of how big or small it's going to be. And so if there's an opportunity for me to create beauty, I'm going to do that, and just release any outcome. Maybe it's big, maybe it's small, maybe I will never, ever know. And that's okay, but that's not up to me.
Yeah. Everything you're saying makes total sense, but then my brain's still like, no. No. And so that may just have to like take some time, some life to just exercise that out of me, because it's like overbearing at times, and I don't know how to get rid of it. And it is good to push yourself, but then I just need to live my life more and not be caught up and it's not even like I'm looking for immediate returns, but it's just like, I'd be so pissed if I got to the end of my life and I felt like I hadn't done something. But it's like this catch-22 where I'm like, well, I have these great relationships and great wife and great kids, and like, can't that be enough? And I still get to, I don't know. And that's terrible, but it's just, I don't know. I'm going to have to work on that. Which also, you were talking about, you've done a lot with the Anglican Church, Christ King, and you had a really integral role in sort of its inception. I don't even know a lot of the story, but what, you don't necessarily have to go into the whole history of this church, but what was that experience like, and what sort of just fulfillment did you derive from like being a part of this thing?
Yeah. And honestly, this goes back to the conversation we were just having. So Nicholas and I moved from Nashville, Tennessee, here to Fayetteville. We were part of a wonderful church community there, and there wasn't one here, and we felt really adrift and homeless. And so it became really clear that God was working to plant this church. And Nicholas, my husband, and I were able to be a part of it from the very beginning. And it was one of those times where, even though we did a lot of work, it was very clear that it wasn't ours to control. Like, God had everything in control. And so we were able to just release. Like, we were able to do the tasks that were set before us, but there was not this burden of success. We knew that if it was going to succeed, that it would have to be God's doing, because it was past our capacity to make it live. And so being able, it was such a privileged perspective to see God work in that way, where things just showed up right when we needed them to show up, to see him bring people to us, things that happened that we could never have orchestrated, and yet there they were, they happened. People, you hear stories of like, I saw God work in this, so we actually did for years and years and still are. So it was just an amazing experience to be able to truly feel like you are co-creating. Like, I am working really hard. It's one of those where you go to bed at the end of the day and you're like, whew, that was a lot of work. But really satisfying because you can see the fruits of it. And we still are today. So there's this point where I am learning, where I reach in any work, whether it's with the church or my own artwork or raising my kids, where you reach the end of yourself. I have no more ideas. I have no more steam. I don't have anything else good to give to this. So it's at that point where we get to stop, and where the Holy Spirit takes over, and we get to co-create with the Holy Spirit leading. And that's where things get really, really exciting. So for me, when it used to frustrate me when I got to the end of myself, oh, I don't have any ideas here. I don't know what to do. Now it's still frustrating. I'm not going to lie and be like, it's so exciting. It's still really annoying where you get to the end of yourself and you're like, oh, I'm inadequate for this task. But at the same time, it's well, you're going to have to take this over now because I don't know what else to do. And that's when things get interesting and good.
And when you've come to the end of yourself in various points of life, or just not even necessarily related to trying to do something like build this church community, but just really discouraging points in life, what have been the things that you found really dug you out of that pit that you'd, whether it's a situation or maybe, a death and family or something like that, but when, what's some of the lowest you've been, and how did you ascend from that?
Yeah. Gosh. Honestly, I think prayer and community. And in both of those things are ways to know that you're not alone. So prayer is, just communication with God, sometimes speaking, sometimes listening, but being able to understand that no matter what, you're not in this situation alone. And then same with community. The lowest point of my life was probably when we first moved here, and we had our son and we didn't have community, and I had a really hard time. As a new mother, it was a real struggle for me for a while, and not having that community support. But as community grew and as we developed it, really just it transformed that whole situation for me to know that I wasn't alone.
Mm. Yeah, and I hear Alexis had a very similar experience with new motherhood and finding community and other moms. And if you had any bit of advice to give to women who are newly mothers and trying to find community, what would you tell them?
You are not crazy. There are so many things that I experienced that I wasn't prepared for, and I thought all the time, I'm crazy. Like, this is not normal.
Yeah.
But the more I would talk to people, and at first I didn't talk to them. It was just me and my like thoughts that I thought were crazy. But as I had community with other new moms, and they're like, oh no, like that's fine. Or there are points where like you get to be in relationship with people and they're able to say, oh no, actually, like you need to get this kind of help for this situation. Like not all parts of new motherhood are normal, but this is the kind of help you need. Like it's abnormal, but it's, you know what I mean? Like normalizing the abnormal, and helping you understand like how to seek the right kind of help. And again, just not be alone and ignore things that don't need to be ignored or make bigger deals of things that don't need to be that big a deal. So it's just wisdom of the community.
Yeah, and the not making a big deal out of certain things. What would you say is something that used to matter to you a lot in life, but no longer really does? And we'll answer that first, then we'll ask the reverse of something that didn't matter to you and now is like front and center. So for starters, just like something that, well, which was it first? Now I'm all mixed up. You can answer which either first.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we did hit on a little bit before, which was like bigness, like importance. I thought that lots of people having eyes on me, and having a positive impression of me was really important. Again, I wanted to live in a big city. I wanted to have a big job. I wanted to be thought of as intelligent, and I just don't care about that anymore. It doesn't make any difference to me at all.
Yeah. And then what's something that maybe wasn't on your radar at all 10 years ago that now has become a big part of your life?
I would say hospitality, which is when Nicholas and I first moved to Nashville, we encountered hospitality like we never had before. There were people we'd never known who, upon first meeting us, just welcomed us into their lives as if we were like their long-lost children or, siblings. And we had never experienced that kind of welcome before, and we felt how powerful that was. And so that practice of seeing what's around you, whether it's people, situations, like what is actually right there staring you in the face, and how do you welcome that? How do you make space for others to flourish and grow? Whether that's accepting them, seeing them as who you are, just giving them a space to be without having to change them.
Yeah, and what's been one of your this is sort of a question of importance to some extent.
Okay.
But what would you say has been one of your proudest moments as an artist? Like a time where maybe you had a piece that really resonated with people the way exactly that you'd hoped for, or something like that.
Yeah, I think honestly, so this year at our church, I'm our artist in residence. And part of that has been, working with our artist guild to create installations. And so this wasn't necessarily like specific work of art that I worked on, although I did have a couple pieces in this show actually. But it was working with a group of artists all around one theme, and putting together this evening prayer service. That it was really the first time that we had something like this in our church, and our church has experienced a lot of growth recently. So there were a couple hundred people there that night, and it was just one evening. And I am so proud of that event, kind of twofold. One, because it gave artists a chance to have their voices heard. So often in churches, artists' voices are maybe a little sidelined or looked at with a bit of suspicion, like artists, speak from the borders a little bit. They say things a little bit differently, and it's sometimes hard to expect and hard to control, and so it's hard to know what to do with. But to give artists the opportunity to say, no, like we want to hear your voices. We want to know what you have to say. And then to watch people listen to those voices and hear them and be moved and say, oh, I had no idea that I could experience the gospel in that way. It was really powerful. So just being able to be a part of it, and to watch artists come to life, come into their own voices, their own powers, and to watch people kind of have a light bulb moment, like, oh, I can, my faith can be embodied. I can see the gospel. I can hear the gospel. It doesn't have to just be something I can think. It was a really, really proud moment for me.
Yeah, something I really appreciate about the Anglican Church is the role of art, and specifically in Christ the King, because it's almost like the inmates running the asylum sorts of like which is the best possible world for like a community, because normally they can be so rigid and unchanged, and having a more dynamic so people that are not even fringy. I wouldn't even say that, as far as just like thinking outside of the box and trying to do things creatively and innovatively, and that's fun to see.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, were you gonna?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, even in the Gospels, like Jesus's message came as stories. It was storytelling. He wasn't, giving a bunch of theology. He was giving little small works of art to people to give them a new way to think about things and to broaden their perspective, and what we're doing too. Hopefully.
Yeah, performance art. It's fun stuff. So this is kind of a play off of the things that you used to feel like were important but no longer do. What in general, outside of you, like in society at large, do you feel like people pay too much attention to that they could maybe back off on some, and then vice versa?
Yeah, I think, and this is something that I have had to struggle with, but I do think it's everybody, paying so much attention to what other people are thinking about you. And nobody's thinking about you nearly as much as you think that they're thinking about you. I promise you, they're just not. It's good news. It's excellent news. And even if they are, like, so what? So finding that freedom from other people's expectations has been really good. And I feel like we'll see a lot more diversity of thought and expression. And also acceptance of others, as well as we release that in ourselves, we'll also be less judgmental of other people. So it can be a real prison, the prison of other people's expectations and thoughts and wanting to please others.
Most definitely. And then what's one of the most like positively impactful things you feel like you've done with your life? That's a huge question. But like a lot of this podcast is really honing in on what's giving people meaning, what they feel, whether they did or something happened to them where they felt like, yes, this is what life's about. And so what's something for you that has just been one of those moments where you thought like, this is it?
I think for me, it has been, so as we talked about, my husband and I were a part of Christ the King kind of from the beginning. And a spirit, an artistic spirit in our community. Our community has been small, it has been large, it's been small again, it's been large again. But one of the constants has been an appreciation of beauty. And seeing now that for a long time it was kind of me just kind of leading the charge on that. But seeing now as we're growing and more artists are coming and feeling empowered, I'm so proud to see beauty. And again, and I could talk more about what beauty is, because I'm not just talking about like the classical, like that's beautiful, but beauty in the way that it means something to people, whether or not it's classically beautiful, but something.
If you have a whole tangent on beauty, go for it.
Sure. What is beauty? Yeah. So again, I've gotten to be, as a part of this artisan residency, I've been a part of um, a residency through the Brehm Institute through Fuller Seminary, which is an institute on faith and art. And one of our recent conversations in readings was about beauty. And there's a woman, last name is Sokolov, and I forget her first name, but she writes about beauty as a relationship. And so if we say, beauty is in its, finds its end in God, like God is beauty, all beauty begins and ends with God. And if we say that God is love, and what is love but a relationship, beauty finds its beginning and end in relationship. And so when you think about a work of art, and if you find it beautiful, so take, for example, some of the works that were up in our Good Friday and our Stations of the Cross, some of those, depictions of the crucifixion, like you wouldn't look at that and say, that is beautiful. Like it's not the classic description of beauty that can be quite terrifying. But they create a conversation. You walk up and you see people look and stay, and you can see that there's a conversation going on. The work of art is giving something to them. They are, responding back. And so beauty is somehow found in that relationship where the artist creates something that it has something to say, not too much. It's not dominating the conversation, nor is it under speaking where the viewer has to say too much, but it's just enough so that there's this conversation, and then the viewer leaves and that conversation is lingering in their mind. So beauty is created when a relationship is formed.
Yeah, I like that a lot, because it seems like things are only as valuable as how much they help others in some way, and aren't just a thing in and of themselves. I've been noticing that a lot more lately, that it's hard for me to get into stuff that whether that's ideas or like I used to just be able to listen to any audiobook or any podcast on any topic, but then the more I think, like, how is this going to make me closer to people, or how is this going to help the world? It's just like not very, and it's just kind of noise. And so I've been realizing the common threads. It's like, this is a people-centered or relational-centered universe, it seems.
Yeah.
What would you say is a practical challenge you might throw out to people that, and you can take a minute to think of something, but something that would just help them become a more compassionate, well-rounded human being, and something that's really practical, like that you could say, I did or I didn't, not just like, oh, try being nicer to people, like not the vague stuff.
I can give you a very practical thing.
Okay.
I would encourage you, the big you, to invite people into your home for a meal. It can be friends, certainly, but perhaps invite people who you don't know very well, or make a point to invite people you don't know at all. Just invite them over for a meal. There is something that happens in the act of eating. This goes back, centuries and centuries, thousands of years. The act of eating together with someone is deeply intimate. And in those moments of intimacy, you can really see and hear from one another. And so this can be especially wonderful when it's people who maybe see things differently from you. So maybe there's a prejudice you have, or something you don't even realize that you're harboring. But as you have conversations with people who are others, you find that your mind is expanded and your compassion gets a little bit greater, because you're not necessarily seeing an other. You're seeing a person who is like you, different from you. It's just the world enlarging.
It's a good challenge and very practical. And anyone can do. Even if you have to make a microwave pizza or something, it's better to have someone over and kind of skimp on the food than
for sure
the way around.
Yeah, no, it doesn't have to be fancy. Make sandwiches, take them to a park. Whatever.
Yeah. And do you have anything else that you'd just like to throw out or mention, or any other just like soapboxes you want to get on for a minute, of something that's been on your mind lately that you're hyped about?
Oh, goodness. I would say, give me just a second
Yeah.
to think. One more thing to do. I would say if you do think of yourself as a creative person, find some small thing. And if you feel like, I feel like I ought to be creative, but I'm not, find some small thing that brings you joy. Like go to Hobby Lobby and find a book on how to draw like cute anime figures or, something. Find some small practical way that you can exercise that creativity for 2 or 3 minutes a day. If you don't think that you're creative, I would say you are creative. You just haven't figured out where yet. Or you don't see that activity is actually creative. But examine your life and see where things are sprouting out of it that make people smile or that make you smile, or that give you peace when you're working on them. Look for those places where life is bubbling up and lean into those. See how you can feed those places. Those are probably the places in your life where you're the most creative, even if it's, not something that you might ordinarily think of as a creative act.
Yeah, it's a great final word. So it's been Angela, and we'll find a way to get pictures of some of your work,
Yeah.
like stitch it in. But it's really cool. Check it out for sure.
Thank you.
And thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me.